It was the one thing that Putin feared losing, so much so that he was even too scared to send it into Ukraine. Putin put it into hiding. Over 1,700 kilometers deep into Russia, what Putin has claimed to be one of the most impressive pieces of Russian manufacturing cowered away on an airstrip. But Ukraine was having none of Putin's nonsense. Ukraine found what Putin was hiding and wiped it out. Annihilated it with extreme prejudice to ensure Russia would have no chance of using it at all. Russia's Su-57s are down. And with them falls Russia's lie about its latest fighter jets being among the best in the world. We head to the little-known Russian region of Chelyabinsk. Located about 1,700 kilometers or a little over 1,050 miles away from Ukraine's borders, Chelyabinsk is closer to Kazakhstan than it is to Ukraine, and it's home to a defense industrial complex that has been feeding Putin's war machine for years. Distance has always been in the region's favor. Tanks and heavy defense manufacturing could take place because Putin felt confident that Ukraine would never be able to launch strikes against Chelyabinsk. The region is also where Russia's Shagol airfield is located. And that combination of having an airfield plus distance made Chelyabinsk the perfect place for Putin to hide one of the most valuable pieces of military equipment that Russia has, the Su-57. Putin thought that Russia's supposedly ultra-modern fighter jet would be safe at Shagol. There, Russia's Su-57s could be maintained as pilots train on how to use them. As it turns out, those pilots weren't training for much, and for more reasons than one. The Su-57 isn't all that Russia claims it to be, as you'll soon discover. But right now, that doesn't matter. Why? Because over 1,000 miles deep into Russia, the Su-57s are burning after Ukraine pulled off a long-range strike for the ages. Hidden fighter jets have been exposed, and Putin is livid. Ukraine's General Staff of the Armed Forces provided the basic details in a May 1st telegram post. Yes, on April 25, 2026, at the Shagol airfield in Chelyabinsk region of the Russian Federation, soldiers of the Unmanned Systems Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine hit several Su-57 fighters and an Su-34 fighter bomber, the General Staff revealed in a statement that is so matter-of-fact it almost makes it seem as though Ukraine hasn't pulled off one of the most remarkable strikes of the war so far. This has been presented as though it's just another day in the office for Ukraine, and that will terrify Putin more than anything. No big deal, Ukraine is saying. We just took out your most modern fighter jets with a bonus strike on top and we can do it again. Russia might have tried to rush to claim that nothing of the sort happened if it weren't for the fact that satellite photographs exist. Ukraine's claims of a strike at Shagol aren't lies or propaganda, they're very real. The Xelanova Plus Telegram channel was among the first to showcase the damage done by Ukraine in a May 1st post that shows at least one Su-57 and Su-34 destroyed on the Russian tarmac. Defense Blog shares the same images, suggesting that they are consistent with Ukraine's claims and appear to showcase a successful attack against the Shagol base's aircraft parking area. There's no worming your way out of this one, Russia. Ukraine found, attacked, and destroyed something that Putin has been desperate to hide. And as if that wasn't bad enough for Russia's dictatorial leader, the Chelyabinsk strike isn't the first time that Ukraine has hunted down a Russian Su-57 and taken it out of the game. As the Kyiv Post points out, this is the second recorded instance of Ukraine crippling one of Russia's supposedly fifth-generation fighter jets. The first came back in June 2024, when Ukraine sent its long-range drones to the Chelyabinsk airfield, which is around 460 kilometers or 286 miles away from Ukraine's borders. Ukraine's 2024 strike was semi-successful, it appears. Military Watch magazine confirms that the strike happened, but adds that it is believed that Russia's damaged Su-57 was able to re-enter service following repairs. Still, the message had been sent. Ukraine could hit Russia's most modern fighter jet, and we're willing to bet that it isn't a coincidence that the Su-57s that Ukraine hit in 2026 were more than 3.5 times the distance away from Ukraine. It's almost as though Putin had them moved further back to prevent anything like the Chelyabinsk strike from happening again. It didn't work. And if the satellite images of the burned-out husk of an Su-57 at Shagol are anything to go by, Ukraine hasn't repeated the mistake of 2024. At least one of Russia's Su-57s has been burned up to the point of no return, and there may be yet another, assuming Ukraine's general staff is correct. We also can't ignore the fact that Ukraine took out one of Russia's Su-34s during its late April strike. That fighter jet is perhaps even more important to Russia's war effort than the Su-57. While the latter hides away at whatever airfield Putin hopes Ukraine can't hit, the Su-34 has been something of a wrecking ball for Russia in its aerial campaign against Ukraine. The jet rarely flies into Ukrainian territory. Russia has learned its lesson there as it lost around 200 of its aircraft during the first months of the war, as Ukraine proved that it could counter Russian jets with anti-air defenses. So the Su-34 has mostly been relegated to flinging UMP-K and UMP-B guided bombs at Ukraine from miles behind the front lines. Those bombs are being unleashed in such massive numbers that they can devastate Ukraine's cities and defenses. Taking out an Su-34 means that Ukraine has deprived Russia of one more delivery vehicle for its guided bombs. That's an achievement in its own right. But the far more impressive achievement and the far more damaging one for Putin is the destruction of at least one Su-57. There are two reasons why: what Russia claims the Su-57 to be and what it actually is. The former shows us that Russia has lost one of the best jets in its arsenal, and the latter highlights how Ukraine has exposed that jet to be nowhere near what Russia claims it to be. Let's start with what Russia wants you to think about the Su-57. Russia calls the Su-57 its most advanced combat aircraft, and it's hard to deny that if you believe that everything Russia says about it. It's meant to be a fifth-generation fighter jet that Russia has completed to compete with the likes of the US-made F-22 and F-35. And Russia claims that it has many of the hallmarks that make those stealth fighters so special. Low observable shaping, internal weapons bays that reduce the jet's radar cross-section, and advanced avionics that are a step above those seen in Russia's fourth-generation fighters are all touted. Russia's United Aircraft Corporation is more than happy to keep up the propaganda, noting that the Su-57 is capable of striking air, ground, and sea targets at any time of day and in any type of weather. The first batch of the jets was delivered to the Russian military in 2020, the corporation reveals, though the Su-57 took its maiden flight 10 years earlier. Could that delay have been a sign that Russia's fifth-generation fighter jet was dealing with some problems? We'll soon find out. Beyond all of this, Army recognition notes that the Su-57 can be loaded with R-77M active radar-guided missiles and R-74M2 infrared-guided missiles, for long and short-range engagements respectively. Tactical, stealth cruise, and anti-ship missiles can all be loaded into the Su-57, as can the types of guided bombs that Russia has been using its Su-34s to launch. Across all of its hardpoints, the Su-57 can carry 10,000 kilograms or around 22,000 pounds of munitions, and with a top speed of Mach 2 and a supercruise speed of Mach 1.3, it's as fast as it is laden with weaponry. Now let's assume that the Su-57 delivers on all of the claims that Russia has made about the jet. If it does, then Ukraine has just taken out a jet that is the very best that Russia has to offer from an aerial standpoint. With unit costs at around $100 to $120 million, the Su-57 has a pretty big impact on Russia's war budget, and Ukraine has just blown all of that away in an instant. Ukraine has also ensured that Russia's apparently lethal fighter jet, against which Ukraine shouldn't have many defenses, is never able to fly in Ukrainian airspace. Only Su-57s haven't really been flying in Ukraine. There are some pretty big reasons why Putin hid Russia's most modern fighter jet so far away from Ukraine, and you're about to find out what those reasons are. But before we dig into them, you are watching The Military Show. If you haven't subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to hit the button so you never miss one of our uploads. We haven't exactly made it a secret that the Su-57 isn't all it's cracked up to be. There were signs that Russia's fighter jet was something of a boondoggle long before Ukraine took at least one of them out in April. India provided many of the early red flags about the Su-57. For years, India was working alongside Russia on a joint project to build a fifth-generation fighter jet. That jet would eventually become the Su-57, but India had pulled out of the 11-year joint deal long before Russia's jet ended service in 2020. India got cold feet in 2018, and it was done with the Su-57 project by April of that year. The 2 years before this withdrawal had been fraught with tension. The Su-57 didn't have the technological capabilities that India expected to see from a fifth-generation fighter. Russia was holding things up by delaying technology transfers and quibbling over cost-sharing plans. For India, the Su-57 project ended up being a failure, in which too much money was being spent on a jet that wasn't going to deliver the stealth fighter competitiveness against the US that was promised. After completing the project on its own, Russia seemed on the verge of getting India back on board. There were plans for India to buy some Su-57s from Russia now the jet was operational. By March 2026, those plans have pretty much fallen apart, even as Russia offered a range of bonuses, including a new engine and an unlicensed variant of the aircraft. India said no. The Su-57 still wasn't up to the appropriate standard to be considered a fifth-generation fighter, India said, and it preferred to put its money into its own AMCA fighter and either the Tempest or FCAS sixth-generation fighter jet programs. Putin had to absorb a 1-2 combo. India was out when it came to buying the Su-57, and the two sixth-generation projects it now wants to join are spearheaded by nations that Russia considers to be enemies. Italy, Japan, and the UK are working on the Tempest. Germany, Spain, and France are handling the FCAS. A potential ally and cash cow has now disappeared for Russia, and it's all because the Su-57 isn't the fighter that Russia claims it to be. More has come out about the Su-57 since India pulled out. The engines are old and unreliable, which is likely why Russia tried to sweeten its deal with India by offering newer engines. When compared to the F-22 and F-35, the Su-57 is nowhere near as stealthy. Radars have between a 6 and 10 times greater detection range for Russia's fifth-generation fighter, the Aviation Geek Club reports. The radar cross-sections of America's premier fighter jets are also anywhere between 1,000 and 10,000 times smaller than that of the Su-57. In essence, the Su-57 is more of a 4.5 generation fighter rather than a 5th generation one, and Russia may not even need it when it has used the Su-35 fulfilling a similar role. Perhaps that's why Russia hasn't built many Su-57s. There are fewer than 30 in service, Euromaidan press reports, and there is one less that can take to the skies after what Ukraine did in Chelyabinsk. Now, here's what all of this means for Russia. No matter which way you slice it, Ukraine taking out an Su-57 is humiliation for Putin. If the jet is everything that Russia claims it to be, then it's being caught with its figurative pants down by Ukraine's attack. That simply shouldn't be happening. In the air, the Su-57 is supposed to be able to take on anything. On the ground, Russia should be protecting it at all times, rather than parking it out in the open, where it could be struck or tampered with. Even if this is a 5th-generation fighter, Russian incompetence has been exposed on a massive level that will have Putin tearing out what is left of his hair. Alternatively, Putin is humiliated by the fact that he's trying to hide the Su-57 away from Ukraine because he knows that the jet can't do the job it was designed to do. A stealth fighter is an asset. We saw that during Operation Epic Fury in Iran, as America's stealth fighters blew past Iran's air defense network, which is at least partially made up of Russian air defense systems. Putin should be using Russia's small fleet of Su-57s to obliterate key Ukrainian targets. Instead, Ukraine has just revealed that Putin is so embarrassed by Russia's newest airframes that he hides them over 1,000 miles away. Neither scenario is good for Putin. A crown jewel, however scuffed that jewel might actually be, has been lost. But as painful as the loss of Su-57s and other fighter jets might be, there is a far larger problem in play for Russia right now. What will really anger Putin is that nobody knows exactly how Ukraine managed to pull off a strike over 1,000 miles deep into Russia that was so accurate and devastating. Ukraine hasn't confirmed how it was done. The General Staff's report makes no mention of the weapons used, which has led to plenty of speculation. Could it have been sabotage? It's possible. Ukraine has a history of using partisan groups to sneak into Russian aircraft bases so they can take out fighter jets. A recent history, in fact, as that very thing happened in December 2025 at a military airfield in Lipetsk, which is in southwest Russia. Partisans working on behalf of Ukraine took out a pair of Su-30 multi-role fighter jets in an incident that Russia tried to brush off by claiming a fire of undetermined origin. This attack involved Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence and took 2 weeks to plan. We may have seen something similar in Chelyabinsk, and that would mean that Ukraine's network of intelligence and sabotage operatives has burrowed its way deeper into Russia than anybody could have expected. Where would Putin be able to hide his Su-57s now? No matter where they go, Ukraine might have partisans on the ground just watching and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. If not saboteurs, then perhaps drones or missiles were the weapons of choice in Ukraine's mind-blowing strike. Neither seems plausible at first glance. Ukraine has made great strides on both the missile and long-range drone fronts, but as the Kyiv Post points out, it doesn't have any of either that can travel as deep into Russia as they would have needed to go to reach Chelyabinsk. But Ukraine does have one thing that could do the job. It's not a drone, it's not a missile, it's a hybrid of the two, and it packs more than enough firepower to destroy an Su-57 with one direct hit. We're talking about the Flamingo. Combining the best of Ukraine's long-range drone and cruise missile technology, the Flamingo has the range needed to reach Russia's Su-57 with plenty to spare. It can travel up to 3,000 kilometers, or a little over 1,860 miles, and it had already been proven accurate at ranges of 1,400 kilometers or 869 miles by March. With its 1,000 kilogram or 2,200 pound payload, the Flamingo is also powerful enough to ruin protective structures and leave craters underneath any airframe that it strikes. But interestingly, that firepower may be what takes the Flamingo out of the running. The satellite images we shared earlier don't seem to display the sorts of impact craters we'd expect to see if the Flamingo was used. We're not saying that Ukraine didn't use the Flamingo, but Ukraine isn't saying anything at all, so it's all speculation at this point. Having said all of that, Ukraine has attributed its attack to its unmanned systems forces. That raises more questions. If conventional drone delivery of explosives is impossible, as both the Kyiv Post and Excelenova Plus claim, then what does that mean? Does Ukraine have a new type of long-range drone that it hasn't revealed? Were the unmanned systems forces working with saboteurs on the ground who attacked Russia's fighter jets with drones launched from inside Russia itself? We may never know. And that's smart by Ukraine. Why give away the trick when it can be used again in the future? Perhaps it won't really matter to Putin, just as with his Su-57 humiliation, Russia's leader now faces a twofold problem. Ukraine has reached a new threshold in terms of the sheer distance it's able to reach into Russia and pick off some of Putin's most important military assets. If it was sabotage that screwed the Su-57, then Russia's intelligence groups aren't doing enough to root out Ukrainian spies and co-conspirators. If it was the Flamingo that rained down, Russia's air defenses at what was clearly an important base either can't do their jobs or they weren't there in the first place. Either way, Putin now has to pick through the wreckage of something that he thought was hidden, something that is irreplaceable right now due to its high cost, and something that Putin thought was safe from Ukrainian attacks. As has happened so often in Ukraine, Putin has been proven wrong. And whether it's by sabotage, long-range strike, or another method, Ukraine is only going to make all of this worse for Russia. Ukraine has penetrated over 1,000 miles deep. Nothing in Russia is safe anymore. Frankly, Putin should have gotten the message much earlier. Ukraine's long-range strategy against Russia has been ramping up throughout 2026, and it's been taking out far more than Russia's fifth-generation fighter jets. Oil has been a constant target, and Ukraine has been unleashing a firestorm that Russia can't put out. The inferno has engulfed some of Russia's most vital oil facilities, and Putin's economic lifeline is in tatters. If you want to find out more, check out our video, which covers Ukraine's campaign against Russia's oil over the last few weeks. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show to get more insight into the latest and greatest attacks that Ukraine carries out on Russian territory. And thank you, as always, for watching.